You're watching LiveONETV in an amazing interview with Marly Hornik. This citizens group has done the hard work to improve New York's elections, which aren't real. But they're getting resistance from the government and law enforcement. Listen to the interview here. I am talking to Marly Hornik right now, and we are going to talk about the New York Citizens Audit. Hi, Marly.
Good morning, Ian. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm very happy to have you on. Tell us what's going on with elections in New York.
Sure. Well, New York Citizens Audit is a unique organization. I'm the executive director. We're a group of volunteers from all across New York State. And beginning in October of 2021, we started doing basically forensic analysis on the voter roll database for the State Board of Elections, known as NICE Voter, and also doing some comparative analysis with the voter roll databases by county where we had those provided. And we ended up discovering, we started sorting our findings into three major categories. One, the voter rolls must be accurate, and that is federal law as well as state law. Two, the votes that are cast and counted in an election must be from qualified eligible voters, which is also the law, and the law defines eligibility. And the third point is that the number of votes cast must equal the number of voters who voted. So just to summarize our general findings in those categories, we initially were researching specific to the 2020 general election. So some of our findings are specific to that election, but they reflect the fact that the NICE voter database is so full of false and unlawful information that it's actually impossible to base an accurate election on it because it is so full of inaccurate data, despite the fact that it is an essential element of our voting system for the Empire State, which is part of our national security infrastructure. Okay. So to summarize from those three categories, we found millions of registration violations that clearly are contrary to black letter election law. So I'm not an attorney, and I cannot say, therefore, what's the adjudication process, but I can clearly read the law. And when the law says you must have a physical address as part of your registration application, and we find 50,000 registrants without an address, I can tell those violate the law. When we have the law clearly states you can have one State Board of Elections identification number for your voting lifetime in New York State, and we find dozens of people with as many as 22 unique registration numbers, and we find 1.1 million people assigned 2.4 million registration numbers at the state level. I can tell you right there, that's 1.3 million counts of election fraud. There's no way those registrations are accurate, and there's no way that they are lawful, and yet they're casting votes. There's a lot of other categories, like we have 12-year-olds registering to vote by the thousands. We have 70,000 people in the database whose registration date comes after their last voted date. So they've been voting sometimes for over a decade, but they weren't yet registered according to the raw data that comes from the New York State Board of Elections. So this is how they're keeping our records. And when they go to the end of their process with administration of an election, they tell us this is all on the up and up and everything looks good, and they certify. So in 2020, going to the category of that votes cast and counted must be from people who are qualified eligible voters, we found 740,396 votes cast and counted in the 2020 general election that violate that simple, basic principle that people of all political affiliations agree on. If you're not eligible to vote, you can't vote. But yet 750,000 people at a bare minimum did so anyway. And I can tell you 31,000 of them were purged from the voter rolls at the time of the 2020 general election. So further codifying the fact that this has to be an inside job, because there's absolutely no way to procure a ballot and cast a ballot at the time of an election if you are purged at that time. And their data shows these people were. Also, we have double, triple, and more votes cast by the same sets of personal identifying information in the rolls that have these extra State Board of Elections identification numbers. So against the law, and actually it's federal law, because your State Board of Elections identification number is what your votes become attached to. So it is as sacred and must be as unique as a Social Security number, for example. And yet there are thousands and thousands of people in Nice Voter, again, the Board of Elections own data. So my name, for example, is completely unique, Marly Hornik. So what I'm trying to show you is that I would have, like, let's say I would have 4 registration records in Nice Voter, despite the fact that there is only one Marly Hornik in the state of New York. And each one of them has a unique State Board of Elections ID number. I'm not saying this is the case for me. I'm using myself with a unique name as an example. And then more than one of those registration records would have cast a vote. But I personally would have not been able to do that, because when you go to the polls, you're given a ballot based on your name and address, right? You're not given a ballot based on your State Board of Elections ID number. So if the registration records are otherwise perfectly identical, there's absolutely no way for a voter to commit fraud using that scenario. It has to be done by somebody with administrative access to Nice Voter. It has to be somebody who's inside the system. Does that mean it's official misconduct? I don't know. It could be someone hacking in. We cannot be naive, right? When we're talking about the national security infrastructure for the elections administered in the Empire State, one of 50 states in our beautiful nation, we can't be naive. There could be a foreign power hacking in, right? Because what a better way than to slowly manipulate the outcomes of our free and fair elections? What better way would there be to slowly destabilize a state, right? Because the will of the people wouldn't be what is putting people in office. It would be your will, but you would just do it subtly and slowly. So again, official misconduct or someone hacking in, I don't know, but I know this database is being manipulated at scale. So let's go to the third category, which was votes cast must equal the number of voters who voted. So why must they equal each other, right? Well, let's take an example of your bank account. Let's say you deposited $338,000 into your bank account, and then you opened it up and there was nothing there. Would that be okay with you? In banking, transactions are expected to balance perfectly, and the same is true in elections. In fact, our elections are like a precious jewel. And when you have let's say in a Hollywood movie, you have a precious jewel, it's always going to be protected. The boundary around that thing is going to be super secure. They're going to have laser beams. They're going to have sensors that measure temperature differences. You know, they're going to be monitoring that jewel so carefully because they need it to be there in the morning. So in elections, we have a jewel like that. That's our free and fair elections. That actually represents our sovereignty as the American people. Because if we are not the ones clearly, honestly, and provably choosing our representatives, we have ceded our sovereignty to bureaucrats who are telling us who our representatives are going to be. And that's a huge, huge problem. Like, you just can't even wrap your head around how significant of a breach of our constitutional system of governance that represents. So this is not a conversation about dirty voter rolls. This is way bigger. So you have your banking system and you know that those transactions are going to match. You have your precious jewel. And in elections, that is protected by an interwoven tapestry, like a web surrounding that jewel of chain of custody requirements, batch reconciliation requirements, risk assessments for the machines, technical specifications and requirements for the machines. Every single part of that election system has a law that protects and bounds it. And the law is determined at the federal level because everything that's considered part of our national security infrastructure is protected by federal law. And every single one of those documents has to be there. That's how we prove that our elections were accurate and that no breach of that system took place. Because if there's a breach, even if it's, you know, they like to say, like, for example, if you're going to challenge an election, you have to be able to prove, you're asking the judge to say this election was unfairly called. It should be reversed, right? A judge doesn't want to do that because no matter what the judge decides, there's going to be voters disenfranchised and there's going to be an angry political party coming after him, right? So judges don't like to be in that position. But still in all, you have to prove that there was so much fraud that the margin of victory cannot be fairly and clearly stated, right? The margin of victory is overcome by potential fraud. So that's what I'm saying is, like, any breach of that system at all in reality has to be investigated. So the judge says, no, you know, it's just not enough fraud and it's too much trouble and I'm going to tick people off. So I'm not going to go there. So we're just going to let it stand. But in reality, like I'm saying, when you're talking about a national security breach, it has to be investigated. In 2020, we had 338,356 more votes cast than voters who voted. And so that tells you right there that the batch reconciliations were not completed, just at a bare minimum. Those because every batch should come out to zero. A batch, that means you have a box of ballots or a sealed bag of ballots. That means the same number of voters who were tabulated as having voted in the poll pads at that time and related to that set of ballots matches the number of ballots in the bag. So for example, you got 20 people in a room, right? Everybody casts a ballot. They throw it in a paper bag. You close the bag, you shake it up, you open it, and there's 25 ballots in there, right? You know something went awry. You cannot be certain of what went awry and therefore certain of the outcome until you investigate. But when they say, we're certain, we're so certain, we're going to certify, and yet they have votes cast by people who were not eligible to vote in the thousands, hundreds of thousands. They have votes cast by people whose registration records violate black letter election law. This is perjury. It is an act of perjury to certify an election and an act of unconscionable arrogance to tell the American people, these are your new representatives. We can't prove it to you. You're not allowed to question us. If you question us, we'll call you an election denier. If you question us, we'll try to bankrupt you. We'll mess with you. We'll prosecute you, like what happened to Greg and Catherine from True the Vote. You know, that's what's going on. We're told you can't question this, but show me in the U.S. Constitution, show me the law or the writing that says the American people, the sovereign of this new nation, are going to have to just take our word for it. That's not the system our founders built. They, on purpose, because they had been raked over the coals for so long by monarchs in Europe, they said, actually, we're going to build a zero trust system. We're going to make this system so robust that when people who are participating here inevitably fail to live up to the expectations we have of them, when they succumb to temptation or personal interest over the interest of the nation as a whole, we'll be able to figure it out because the books are open. everybody can see the receipts in a zero trust system. That's by design. But here, we're standing here, the American people are standing here saying, this just doesn't feel right to us. And we would like to see the receipts. And they're saying, no, you can't see the receipts. Just take our word for it. That is absolutely un-American. And we can't let that stand. They do not have the right to call our elections without proving it to us.
Well, I don't know what to say other than I listened as carefully as I can right now. I'm going to think about this throughout the day and throughout the week. I have a few questions that come to mind, but please continue forward. So what happens with the investigators?
Well, that's a good question, actually, and it's an open question still. So we have met, New York Citizens Audit, and myself personally, we have met with a lot of investigators and officials in New York State. We have met with the Special Investigations Unit of the State Police. We have met with, and actually the information we brought to them was regarding an even deeper manipulation of NICE voter that we uncovered by a miracle, which has to do with the way those State Board of Elections identification numbers are assigned. In fact, there's a much deeper fraud going on, and we do know that is criminal, and we do know it was done knowingly with malice, and we do not know who did it. And we are working with investigators to try to force that to be uncovered. But that's a separate issue. If people go to auditny.com and go to the media page, you can see a presentation I did in Arizona, August 13th, 2022. I presented that particular set of information, a little bite of it. It's about 12 minutes long, I think. It's from The Pit, the event that Catherine Engelbrecht and Greg Phillips of True the Vote sponsored in August of last year. So we've brought that to the state police, and they actually concluded and agreed that it looked like treason and that it was a real scenario we had uncovered. We sat with them for 5 hours, and they passed that investigation because of who actually has jurisdiction in the US over an investigation of that magnitude. They passed it to the FBI, to the Foreign Intelligence Task Force. And we haven't heard from them. That was June 27th, 2022, and we haven't heard a peep from them. So theoretically, they could be investigating it, but it seems rather unlikely because the investigation, the research done is extremely complex, and it's not a simple matter that they could just kind of like open up the documents and decipher it and begin an investigation. They really would need to talk to our researchers. So it's unlikely that anything is happening with that. We've met with inspector generals. We've met with sheriffs. We've met with DAs. We've met with New York Assemblymen. I met 2 weeks ago. I met with a New York Assemblyman on the Election Law Committee who basically told me that what I was showing him was not truthful. But he really didn't review it carefully and didn't really want to hear about it. And I don't feel that it was a very fair meeting. He had a preconceived idea of who I was and what I was going to be talking about. And he continually responded to his preconceived idea based on media accusations of people who dare to say, prove you won before you take office and start signing bills into law, before you're allowed to start changing our culture at the state and national level. Prove you won. Let's see the books. Let's just make sure we got this one right. Because, for example, if you're going to be a U.S. congressman, if you're going to be a state election official, if you're going to be, or not election, a state legislative official, let's just make sure. If you're going to be the governor of New York State or the attorney general of New York State, we want to see the books. We want them opened up. We want to check the receipts and make sure, because that's a really important position. And we want to be sure that the will of the people in choosing our own representation is being upheld. Those elections have got to be accurate. And right now, they actually can't prove that any of this is accurate because of the manipulation of the voter roll database. So anyway, we have met with tons of officials. And Ian, I'm sorry to say that other than a handful of sheriffs, we do not have any traction yet with any of them. We have a couple sheriffs, we have one Board of Elections person, and we have one DA that have stuck with the information long enough to say this is compelling. And actually, one of the sheriffs that we met with, he said to me, you know what, Marley, I would really like you to help me here. He said, you've given me evidence of 1,500 crimes in my county, and I'm buried in cases because, think about the position of a sheriff right now, because possibly because of the election outcomes not necessarily reflecting the will of the people. We're dealing with a crime spree across New York State that is devastating for the people and devastating for the officials. And there's so many stories I could tell you, but let me get back to the one I was going to tell you. This one sheriff, he said to me, Marley, I need your help. He said, give me 10 felony voting violations in my county that I can investigate. I can follow up on these, and I can assure myself that you're correct, that this was not voter fraud. This is official misconduct somehow, whether it's through negligence or, deliberation, we don't know, but it had to have been done inside. So I said, fine. So we gave him those 10. We gave him, for example, we gave him a woman who went to vote in 2020, and she was turned away at the polls. She was turned away because she wasn't registered to vote. She had never registered to vote. She had no idea you needed to be registered to vote. She was young and it was her first time, and she just went. She's like, oh, great. I'm going to be an American. I'm going to go vote. So they said, no, you can't vote. Next time, come around next time and you can register, get yourself registered, and next time we're going to give you a ballot. So she left. And that was November 3rd, 2020, right? The general election was November 3rd, 2020. So she now has 2 registration records in Nice Voter. One of them was registered on November 23rd, 2020. The other one was registered on November 20th, 2020. She did go and register to vote on the 23rd, I believe, was the one that she legitimately did ask for. The question that we all have, and the sheriff confirmed he has it also, is how on earth did those 2 registration records dated 17 days after the election and 20 days after the election, assigned to the exact same name, date of birth, and address with 2 unique State Board of Elections ID numbers, how did they both cast a vote on November 3rd, 2020? So this is the kind of data we gave the sheriff to investigate. And we had already we'd already canvassed all of these people. We made sure that we were not sending him on a wild goose chase because he has got a lot on his plate and we don't want to waste his time. He went and confirmed all 10 of them. He was so shocked. He called the state police investigators we had met with, and he said, is there anything going on? He said, you guys have got to take this seriously. This is not good. Not good for New York. Very, very concerned. So I'm excited about developments like that. And we have a couple other sheriffs also looking into a very tight, very well-defined set of felony voting violations that they can manageably follow up on for their counties, because nobody knows quite how to crack this nut. It is epic. And I don't think there's a lot of people in New York at this moment who would say there's just no way any of our officials have been subjected in the Empire State where Wall Street is located. There's just no way any of our officials at the state level have been subjected to elite capture. It's not a single one of them is taking bribes. Not a single one of them is under any threats. This looks good. 2.4 million ID numbers assigned to 1.1 million people looks fine to me. Let's keep going, right? And meanwhile, the people are like, what the heck? This just the policies being forced upon us do not match our identity. Right? So you have criminal identity theft in the voter rolls. You have people's personal identifying information being manipulated and stolen at an official level and used to commit felonies, federal felonies, voting violations, double voting, triple voting, removing votes, registrations voting that are the incorrect registrant. This is all going on in the rolls. This is criminal identity theft. And then here we are in the state, they're passing these laws. It doesn't look like they care what we think about it. It doesn't look like they're concerned with our safety. They're not concerned with our financial solvency. I mean, they literally, I was sitting the other day in a Panera and I was sitting there and I'm like, I used to go to little mom and pop places for lunch. I was out running errands with my kids and we had to get some lunch and we went to a Panera. I was sitting there and I thought to myself, I looked around at the restaurant, all those people were all on our phones, which is something that's going on right now. And I was thinking about all those restaurants and all those businesses and Panera and whatever, Five Guys and all of these big corporate chains. They told us, the American people, and specifically in New York, they said, you guys have to close your businesses and we're going to stay open. You have to shut down, but we're going to be open for you. These massive corporate chains, and that's all that's left. And Panera was packed, whatever day it was, a Thursday or a Tuesday or something, packed, because that's what's open now. All those businesses are gone. And that was our financial solvency. That was our contribution to the United States economy and to the economy of New York State, and it's gone. These are the laws. These are the edicts, laws, emergency orders, all of the people having to succumb, or the vast majority of our people having to succumb to an experimental medical procedure in order to continue their participation at work or at school. That's totally unconstitutional. If you want to take an experimental medical procedure, I'm not here to stop you. I'm not here to judge that, and I don't know the answer of whether or not it was a good choice for you. But these draconian approaches to dealing with the people at a time when they also refuse to say, here's how we can prove the outcome of these elections. And a time when it seems like people are at each other's throats. It's like if you're in this party and you're in that party, you're not allowed to be friends. You could be neighbors, but you're going to spit on each other's houses now. It's not healthy for people. And it's really not healthy for our children to see grown people acting this way, the models and leaders of how to behave in a civic society. It's like this has to be pushed back on. And from my perspective, the elections are like the Achilles heel of the entire system. The elections are the key that turns all the locks. Because if the wrong people did get into office, and if they got into office through any kind of official misconduct, whether it had been at the Board of Elections or whether it had been in the administration of their election, or whether it was money changing hands or contracts, for government contracts, I don't know. And I'm not here to accuse any one individual because those are criminal investigations. But I know that if we don't push back on these elections, we are going to lose everything. And the only way right now to push back is to go ahead and say the people who certified these elections, who are unwilling to receive our questions, they're unwilling to respond to our petitions. I mean, we brought all this information to the New York State Board of Elections in May of 2022. We brought it to the Attorney General. We brought it to the Secretary of State. We brought it to the head of the Democratic Party and the head of the Republican Party, and no one responded. And
Marley,
they went ahead. did it again. Yes.
Marley, did you bring it to the attention of the people? You brought it to the attention
That's
of
why I'm
various
here.
state agencies. How do you get the word out to us? How do you get that bullhorn out to alert the people of the state of New York and the United States as well of what could be happening into their electoral process?
Yeah, well, that's an issue that we have worked on extensively, and I'm so grateful for your help today in spreading that message. We have, if you go to auditny.com, there's a couple of ways that people across New York State can help and are helping right now. There are we have over 1,100 volunteers active today across the counties of New York State, helping with that exact process. So we have, if you go to auditny.com, you can click on the tab called Volunteer, and you can submit yourself as someone who is willing to help in your county and in your area. The other thing you can do, if you don't have time to volunteer your time, you can certainly share our messages on social media. You can look up New York Citizens Audit on any social media platform, and you can start spreading those messages far and wide. You can also look up me personally, Marly Hornik, on Twitter. There's a donate button, and New York Citizens Audit is 100% volunteer. We are I'm a homeschool mom. People are farmers. People are, researchers, writers, editors, computer programmers. Every kind of person has made meaningful contributions to this effort.
Can you tell us, I don't know if you can or not, you mentioned the state police. Was the contact made in Queens, Manhattan, or Albany?
The meeting was in
office?
Albany.
Okay. And is there any value in asking people to call the state police or call their district attorneys and asking them, are they pursuing this?
Yes, absolutely. The more people take this, the more it's really up to we the people. They're not just gonna roll over and say, well, a handful of people are hopping mad, so we better look into this. It's going to take a tidal wave of New York State citizens saying you absolutely must look into this. We will not continue. We cannot continue this way, and you must look into it. Political pressure is real, and it affects all of our elected officials, including judges, including DAs, including sheriffs, including county and state level legislators, and like I said, including town boards. There's documents at auditny.com that you can download and you can print up and bring to any and all of them and say, we want this investigated, or call up and say, you got to go to auditny.com. You have to look into this. We're not happy.
Yeah, you mentioned it was brought to the attention of a DA. I know on geographic Long Island there are 4, and of course Staten Island, the Bronx, and Manhattan. Which DA did you guys bring this information to?
We've brought it to 4 different DAs, and at the moment, I don't share the names of any of them because I don't want them to be subjected to any kind of harassment. I would like them to do the right thing and figure out how to look into this in the best way possible, and I doubt that that's the most public way possible. I think that could put them at risk of losing the ability to help at all.
Okay, right. And how about the New York Attorney General, Letitia James' office?
Yeah, absolutely. People should call them. People should be pounding on them. This has to be investigated. This is a breach of our national security infrastructure.
Right. Did you bring
And
it,
until
or can I bring it? I'm not asking you to do everything. Can we bring it to the New York field office of the FBI and the Department of Justice.
Absolutely. Bring it everywhere. Yes, absolutely. And I do recommend, though, if you want, which is to try to stay in contact with the New York Citizens Audit team as you unfold efforts like this, either through, filling out a volunteer form so we can be in touch as you're doing stuff so we can coordinate and we can build on it together, or just by sending an email to the info@auditny.com email that's there on the website, just to say, hey, I brought it over here today, or, just so there's some communication and coordination. But in the end, to tell you the truth, there's going to be so many of these things going out all over the place. We're not going to be able to even keep track of it. It's so beautiful because, we get on our calls every week. I do for our volunteers, every week I do a 2-hour training call, and it sounds like a long time, but it's actually pretty fascinating because I'll go over every part of those reports and documents. We'll just go like on a deep dive into it so that the people who are coming in and getting this training, they're really learning the law, and they're really learning how those numbers were derived, what was the research process, and what do they represent, like on the biggest level, so that when they go and they do represent the data, they feel confident when the officials say, well, it's a default date from when we changed the registration records to electronic from paper. Then people can say, now that doesn't add up. I'm sorry, because that happened over 20 years ago. And we've been paying you, and you could have sent out postcards to these people, and their registration records violate the law. And so that's an unacceptable excuse. So things like that. So, if you come in and join the team, you'll get that kind of training. But if otherwise, we'll just keep it going. They're going to hear from people all over the state. So that's what I was going to say. These people come to the meeting, we have these great meetings, and everyone's like, oh, well, I brought it to these county legislators, and this is what happened. And now they're taking it to here. And then someone says, well, I brought the resolution to the town of Horseheads, and it was at a meeting where there were representatives from the town of Baldwin, and the supervisor of the town of Baldwin requested a copy of the resolution for his town because he's so mad. So the people didn't even have to bring it to him. He came and he heard about it, and he wanted a copy for himself. So that's this groundswell of activity. It's all over. They were in Riverhead the other night. They were in Erie County the other night. In Jefferson County, they just signed another town signed the resolution. Genesee County, they signed the resolution. This is all over the state. If you're an official, New York Citizens Audit is coming.
Yeah.
We come in peace, and we come with the facts.
So could you tell us, like, the conversation is very interesting. There's things maybe we get into another time, or now just briefly. I'm interested in Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch recently, about a month ago or 2 months ago, claimed that they had successfully cleaned some of New York's voter rolls. There's Patrick Byrne. I believe that he's been devoting his life since 2020 to election integrity, working with General Flynn and something called the American Project. And he's still down in Maricopa. I mean, I follow Patrick Byrne, and every couple of days, he's still very much involved in the election integrity issue. But back here in New York, when you've looked at this, is there a specific point of vulnerability for the election process? If we were to put the focus on, or to put a video camera on one specific point where the fraud happens, where is that point of vulnerability in our election processes? I imagine it might be multiple points, and it could go to the integrity of people who certify. But is there a few points of vulnerability you could tell us about?
Yeah, the biggest vulnerability, and the one that must and will eventually be adjudicated, is the systematic manipulation of state and county voter roll ID numbers, state and county board of elections ID numbers. That's the voter matrix. What that does, actually, not only does it prove that someone has breached the system significantly and installed programming that runs as an undercurrent. The local boards of elections officials have no idea this is there. We've spoken to them. They can't see it. They have no idea how this works, and they don't know it's in position. And in fact, we've spoken with one official who certified an election he remembers exactly this one particular point of how many purged voters managed to vote in his election was one. And he knew the entire story. He knew the person, he knew everyone involved. He knew how it had happened. And we showed him that the state claimed that his election had allowed over 60 voters who were purged to vote. So that was his first glance that what he's doing on the local level doesn't match what the state is doing. That's all through this voter matrix. What does the voter matrix trade on? It trades on mail-in ballots, because the mail-in ballot fraud is so massive. Did you know 30% of all the mail-in ballots sent on a national level were never found again? Like, no one knows what happened to 30% of those ballots mailed out all over America. There's so many more ballots being sent out. They're sent out. So like, for example, this, this guy, Mr. B in the Bronx, he has 21 State Board of Elections ID numbers, all assigned to the exact same name, date of birth, and address. And if all 21 of them were sent a ballot, which is totally reasonable, some of those registrations are purged. It doesn't matter. They're sending these to everyone. They're sending them to every address. They're sending these all over the place. And, so those land in his mailbox. We went to that address. This guy doesn't exist. He's never lived there. There's no sign of him ever having lived there. There's no one with that name at that address. We've canvassed a lot of these folks, people with 11 State Board of Elections ID numbers, never existed at that address. And they may not even be, they could be a completely fictitious person. So the point is, they have all these mail-in ballots. And if they want to inject them into the election system, they have to first figure out how many they need. So that's why on election night, they're not ready to call the election, because on election night, they're counting the day of. And now they need to know what the outcome is so that they can manipulate it. Now they need more time. Oh, we need more time. We need more time. That's so they can figure out how many of those mail-in ballots they're going to attach to registration records in Nice Voter. Because if they have a pile of ballots that doesn't correlate to any so-called registered voter, now they have a big deficit, which we had anyway, right? We had 338,000 more votes cast than voters who voted, but maybe there was more, right? So they have to have a way. This Nice Voter has over 21 million registered voters listed. And let's say, according to our findings, we have millions of them flagged as potentially fraudulent. We have millions of them that have clear deficiencies according to the law. They're not eligible according to New York state election law, which is very simple to read what constitutes eligibility. It's very clear, black letter law. So how do they find those? Let's say it's 3 million. Let's say it's 2 million. I don't know the exact number when it's all said and done. They dump them in a database with 21 million records. How do they find them? That's like dropping water in the ocean. How do you go back and find that same drop of water so you can drink it? They have their pile of ballots and they have their fake registrations. It's the voter matrix that allows them to, in a coordinated and very, very fast manner, attach as many of those ballots to a fraudulent registration that appears legitimate as needed.
Yeah.
They extract them back out of that sea.
Ian, let me just inject here for a second. You have about 11
Please.
minutes left on this Zoom. About
Yeah.
11 minutes left, okay?
Okay, thank you, Frank. Marley, when you talk to different levels of law enforcement, sheriff or DAs or the AG, by the way, was the governor included in that?
The governor is going to be a recipient of the resolutions and the new petition that we have, which is also, people can sign that digitally. That's the petition in support of the resolution for the end-to-end audit of the 2022 general election.
Okay, so then the governor of New York will at least be made aware of this. When you talk to
Yep.
the different levels of law enforcement, have you ever encountered a division that's called the political corruption or the political voting unit or the voting unit, or is that something that just doesn't pop up? Is there a unit in some of these agencies that specifically looks at election fraud?
The only agency that has an assigned election fraud contact person is the Board of Elections.
Yeah, that
And
doesn't seem
again,
like enough.
we brought all of this information to the State Board of Elections on May 9th of 2022, and we never have heard from them, not one peep.
Yeah, does it seem like a reasonable idea that either the FBI or the DOJ would have a unit that is full-time devoted to securing the elections? I don't know if that's what CISA does, the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency. We know what a mess they made of things in 2020 with Michael Krebs, which was basically one of the big scandals in of a major agency involved in misinformation.
Yes.
They had to walk back Michael Krebs' statement that it was the most secure election in history. They had to walk back it on their own website. About last June, I believe, they released a 9-page, not a 9-page, a 9-point paper on the vulnerabilities of the Dominion voting systems. And that's
Right.
actually, as we speak on the CISA website, that's a big contrast from Michael Krebs telling everybody that it was the most secure in history. But notwithstanding that these agencies don't seem to be performing very well, CISA specifically, or CISA, depending how you pronounce it, does it seem reasonable to you on one level that some of the law enforcement agencies need a full-time division or unit specifically for election fraud, that the Board of Elections is not able to do it, probably doesn't have arrest powers? Does it make sense to you that a full team is needed?
Well,
Full-time
I'm
team?
not right. Yeah. I think it's important to identify the best way to oversight that for sure. And I can say there's no question that having the Board of Elections oversight themselves is a massive conflict of interest, and they are unlikely to do a thorough job. It's Chris Krebs, who was
Oh, Chris.
who was the director of CISA at the time of 2020, and he's actually, interestingly, that's a cybersecurity infrastructure security agency, or cyber infrastructure security agency, right? And he is an attorney, right? He knows nothing about cybersecurity. It's not his wheelhouse,
Mhm.
and it's not his background or experience. So to again be in the position as the American people of taking his word that it absolutely was certainly and unquestionably the most secure election in American history is ridiculous. He doesn't
Yeah,
even have the qualifications
right.
to discern whether or not it was. So yes, I think the issue of who is going to oversight our elections is a big issue, and the resolution for the end-to-end audit, you can read it on the front page of auditny.com, and it
I
has
have. The
five.
website's fantastic, and I
Yeah.
recommend everybody go to auditny.com. It is beautifully laid out, and it leads. We only have a couple of minutes, and then I think it automatically is going to disconnect us. So let's avoid that. I just want to say, have you ever thought of whether you would merge what the work that you've done, if one of the law enforcement agencies would give office space and somehow work in-house with the work you've done? It seems to me like that you should be merged with one of the agencies that has investigative powers.
Well, I don't think we should be outright merged. I think we should be a citizen branch of government, frankly. There should always have been and should always be into the future citizen oversight. That's the fourth branch of government. We're the sovereign, and we do, just like, okay, you might hire someone to do your taxes, but you're still going to go over what they did and make sure that you're happy with it, right? Because
Well,
it's your name at the bottom of that filing. So I think it's very important that the citizens remain independent and remain connected and have the opportunity to participate meaningfully in those investigations. And at the moment, as the state police correctly discerned, it is the federal government that has the authority to investigate something of this magnitude. They're actually correct. I'm not saying that the state police can't do anything about it at all, but the state police is part of the executive branch of New York State. So they're underneath an elected official who has skin in the game. And obviously is a highly partisan official. So it makes it difficult to even have a meaningful oversight or conversation.
All right, Marley, let's stay connected and let's go and come back soon. Maybe even next week we can talk again and get more into specifics like call of action for people. Definitely, I recommend people go to auditny.com. It is a beautiful, organized website. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And could we talk to you again soon about what's next?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the time and interest today to take a look at this with me.
We thank you a lot. And thank you, Frank, our technician. And with that, we'll go and come back soon.
Take care,
Bye-bye
everyone.
now.
Have a good day.
You're watching LiveONE.TV, and we are still here. We are still broadcasting. Don't forget to check out our recent report on the New York Citizens' effort to indict Anthony Fauci for unlawful research. Our recent report on the political crimes of Mitt Romney. LiveONE.TV is the home of the Capitol Mouse House.